Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. My name is Arianna Gonzalez, and I'm the Client Services Manager here at Chug Attorneys and CPAs. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Diya Mathews from our Edison, New Jersey office. Hi there, Diya, and welcome.
Thanks, Arya. Look forward to the conversation with you.
Thank you for being here. So for today's topic, we're going to be talking about visa options beyond the H-1B cap selections. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer for everyone watching. We are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. This conversation is for informational purposes only and does not create an attorney-client relationship. So please comment your questions below or email us at info@chuk.com and we'll be happy to help you out. So let's get right into it, Diya. We know that so many people have filed for the H-1B petition and few people have been selected. So let's talk about the options that people have if they haven't been selected. So let's say someone's H-1B petition doesn't get picked in the lottery. What's the first thing they or their employer should do? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Ariana. So this is something we've been, I guess, addressing the last month or so. So many people have been disappointed with the results of the H-1B lottery, right? I guess about 750,000 registrations, and of that, a very small percentage got selected. Now they want to know what the other options are. But ideally, this conversation should have happened before the lottery itself, right? Because we know that the chances of selection are going down every year. So if an employer and a foreign national are serious about looking at continued work authorization for the individual in the US, then they should really be planning on, they should be prepared with some backup options, right? And so that's what we will talk about today. There are some other visa options, some other pathways which might be helpful. The H-1B is, and I like to use this, the H-1B is really the McDonald's of the visa options, right? But again, if you don't get selected in the H-1B lottery, then you have to look at the other options. I guess the first thing we tell people is, you could always, unless you're from India or China, unless you're born in India or China, you could look at applying for residency, right? The green card application itself. And that takes about, I would say, if you're doing a labor certification based, then there's it takes about 2 to 3 years, I would say, or maybe about 2 years. The EB-5 is also a reasonably good option for most people, including people from India, especially if you utilize the set aside or the reserved categories for rural and unemployment, high unemployment area projects. But otherwise, it's the temporary visa options that we have to look at.
I see. So you mentioned that the alternatives for the H-1B, if that's not an option, people can look into green cards and the EB-5. Are there any other visa categories that skilled professionals should be looking at, or are those the two main ones that you would recommend?
Yeah. So apart from the green card, categories, and I think we have a few other videos of recordings on it. But today, I think we'll focus on the work visas, right? That are alternatives to the H-1B. And there's, plenty of them, right? You have the whole alphabet soup. You have the visa categories from A to Z pretty much. But, in terms of the practical, the realistic application, today we'll talk about a few. I'm thinking, we can talk about cap exempt H-1Bs, E3s, TNs, all of that. Okay. So should we get right into the work visa options?
Yeah, let's dive into the work visas and see what you have to share on that for us.
Okay. So the cap exempt H-1B, right? And what do we mean by that? So it's pretty much an H-1B, the same as an H-1B, just that you are not going through the H-1B lottery for that, right? So certain organizations, like if you're a university or a research-based nonprofit, for example, you can actually sponsor H-1B visas without going through the lottery, right? The advantage is then you don't have to wait till March and put in the whole registration application. You can file the H-1B petition, I should say, any time of the year and ask for an immediate start date. So as I said, typically this is used by universities, educational institutions, higher educational institutions, and certain nonprofits. What's great is that you can also apply under this category if your organization is not a university or a nonprofit, but has an affiliation with a qualifying university or university hospital, for example. If you have documented affiliation with these organizations, and the foreign national is going to be spending the majority of their time at the university or the nonprofit, then you could still apply in the cap exempt H-1B category. Okay, so that's a great option. It's also helpful to know that once you qualify for the cap exempt H-1B, you can in parallel concurrently also work for a regular employer who's not really cap exempt. So you can have, concurrently, you can have both these petitions. And this is something of course, not every employer is going to be able to sponsor a cap exempt H-1B, but this is something, depending on the kind of work assignment you have, it's worth looking at. Okay. The other one, and again, this is it falls within the whole H-1B umbrella. You could also look at for people who have Singapore or Chile citizenship, right? You could also look at H-1B1 option, which is you have a certain number of H-1B visas set aside every year for nationals of Singapore and Chile. And this cap or this limit is rarely reached. So this is also a good option for people who might have those citizenships. Okay. And then again, the similar to the H-1B, you have the E3 for Australian nationals. So that's also fairly straightforward, simple application. The E3, and there is no quota or anything any time of the year, so you can apply with an immediate start date any time of the year. And the last one is the TN visa, which is for Canadian citizens. Right. So with TN, there are a certain number of occupations. It's not that any kind of position will qualify for a TN. The requirement for the TN is the applicant has to have Canadian citizenship and should be looking to come and work in the US in a job that falls in one of the listed categories. But it's a pretty wide list. So there's a lot of professional occupations listed there. And so that also works out well. And it's a pretty cost-effective application as well with the TN.
That's great to know. Those are some great options you provided for our listeners. So if you guys are wondering if you qualify for the cap exempt H-1B or the H-1B1 or the E3, make sure you're talking to your attorney or scheduling a call with us so we can help you out, and make sure that you do know that you have alternatives if you didn't get selected for the H-1B. So let's talk about the IEP or the startup visa. I know you have some information on that. If you could share that with us, I think that'd be really helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you asked that. So the IEP, as you might know, Arianna, is a relatively newer type of option. It's not really a visa. It's a parole. It's more like a permission to stay in the US and work. It was launched, I think, in 2017 or so officially, and it stands for the International Entrepreneur Parole. We call it the IEP, right? And this was meant to be for startups, right? Because we have a lot of the US is very big on innovation, and we wanted to have a path for startups to be able to hire good talent, because many of these startups are actually being founded by people who are here as students or some sort of temporary work permit. And so, we wanted to look at options for them to continue and, work for the startup. So it was started, as I said, in 2017 or so. For a long time, especially with the previous administration, there wasn't much going on. They were not adjudicating these cases. And then with the recent change of administration, with the Biden administration, they actually put out guidelines, and they affirmed that they would adjudicate these cases. So the good thing is it's, you have pretty much, what we could call a startup visa or the IEP. But the adjudication time frame has not yet been released by USCIS. So we don't know, unfortunately, we are not seeing so much use of the IEP as we anticipated. I guess what I would tell clients is that you could look at the IEP as an option, but in terms of adjudication, be prepared, for some exceedingly long timelines, unless USCIS, changes their policy. Okay, but back to your question, what does it take? So it's really for the startup world, right? And so you have to show that the sponsor, the employer, is a startup, and a startup is defined as a business which is not older than 5 years. And should have, the foreign national or the applicant should have a substantial ownership interest in that startup. I believe there's a requirement of owning at least 10% in the startup, and we have to show that the startup has potential for rapid growth and job creation in the US. So one of the ways USCIS, one of the defined metrics from the USCIS is they look at how much funding the startup has actually raised in the last 18 months or so. And so, you can demonstrate that by showing that you've received venture capital funding of 250,000 or so in the last 18 months, prior to making the application. Or you can show government funding. And if it's government funding, the threshold is a little less. It's about 100,000. So if you can, these are the main requirements, and there are some additional ones too. But at a high level, if you can demonstrate that these requirements are met, then you potentially have a good IEP application. Okay, so this is a great option for people who have been here as students, or they have a brilliant idea. They want to start some sort of business, and if they have an ownership interest and they've raised external capital, then the IEP is a viable option.
The IEP sounds like a great option for entrepreneurs who want to come to the States on that visa. So far we've talked about the cap exempt H-1B. We've talked about the H-1B one for Singapore and Chile. We've talked about the E3 and the TN, and you just spoke to us about the IEP, or the startup visa. Do you have any other types of visas that you would recommend on top of all of those that we just covered a little bit?
Yeah. As I said, there's a lot of visa options out there, but not, everything is a good fit for everyone. With the H-1B visa, for example, I believe about 70% of that is used by applicants from India, followed by China, and then the other countries, right? So if you are from India or China, then in terms of the options, it gets to be a little limited. But these days, we are seeing a lot of, requests for O1 visa. And the O1 is for people with extraordinary ability. It's not for everyone. You have to show that you've done something exceptional in your field, and that, you are recognized in your field, right? So the O1 is also, something I guess worth looking at. We would evaluate the applicant and see if there is enough to make a case. Sometimes we tell people, hey, you don't really have a very strong O1 case right now, but, you could maybe work on your resume a little bit, establish some more credentials, and then, we could look at doing the O1 for you. The O1, again, if you qualify or you're nearly qualified, then it's a good option because there's no annual limit. You get a 3-year approval, and that can be extended in 1-year increments without any limits. But you have to show that you have some sort of extraordinary ability. And how do you show that? That really depends on the kind of field in which you claim to be the expert. Typically, we would ask for publications. We would ask for your how many times you've been cited. Can you get recommendation letters from experts in the industry? Have you won any major awards? If you got a very significant award, then that really might be all that you need. But otherwise, right, then you might need to show a combination of different factors to prove that you are really top of the line in your field. So we work on recommendation letters. We ask for people to produce, show whether they've been invited to speak at conferences, publications. All that goes into filing the O1 application. So the O1 will take some time. It's not something that you can really, file tomorrow. It takes some time in terms of preparation, 2 to 3 months, I would say. But the good thing is there's premium processing available. So, you would get a decision fairly quickly.
So the O1 sounds like a great option for the people who would qualify for that. So if you are thinking about that, if you do think you might qualify, make sure you're verifying with your attorney, make sure you are eligible for that and you can come on the O1 visa. What about the J1 visa? Do you have any info on that one?
Yeah. The J1 is also good, mostly for training assignments. Mm-hmm. So, you would use the J1 for if you're coming here to, let's say, undergo some training. If the assignment that you have in the US involves some sort of training, right? Either you give training to other individuals or you want to undertake some training. And with the J1, you would work with a sponsor agency. There are many accredited agencies that work as J1 sponsors, and they help you with the paperwork. So it's important. The J1 is, again, not a very long-term visa. It's usually for 18 months or so. There are limits to that. But as long as, the primary purpose is some sort of training, the J1 is also a good option.
That sounds like a great option. So just for everyone who's just tuning in, we're talking about alternatives to the H-1B visa. This is just for informational purposes only. This does not create an attorney-client relationship. So please comment any questions you guys have below or email us anytime at info@chuk.com and we're happy to help you out. So let's get into the E1 and E2 visas. So how do the E1 and E2 visas work as H-1B alternatives for those who are looking to trade or invest?
Yeah, those are part of the treaties that actually the authorization for the E1 and the E2 visas come from the treaties that the United States has with different countries. Unfortunately, India and China are not parties to that. So, if you're from India or China, you would not qualify for the E1 or the E2 visa. Okay. It used to be that sometimes clients from India would say, hey, we really want to utilize the E2 visa, and they would apply for citizenship of certain other countries, like Grenada and Turkey, and with the understanding that once they get the citizenship of those countries, they would then qualify to apply for the E2. Okay, so that, and we've had people who've done that in the past. But with the recent change in the law, that's no longer possible. I mean, it's not feasible because in addition to, having the citizenship of the other country, like a country like Grenada, for example, the US government now requires that you should also have resided in those countries for at least, I think, 3 years before you qualify for the E2. So it's not just, getting the citizenship of that country. You also have to show that you had domicile or you had residence in those countries for at least 3 years before you apply for the E2. But anyway, I mean, if, the vast majority of countries do qualify for the E1 and the E2. And these are investment-based visas. So we'll talk a little bit more about the E2. The way the E2 works is that, you show that you're, coming to the US to set up a business here, and you should have invested in that business, and you should hold a significant shareholding in that business. The application usually comprises a business plan where you show how your investment amount. Typically, we recommend investments of 100,000 or more. But you could, depending on the kind of business, maybe you could do more or less, a little less. But yeah, you have an investment and you demonstrate that your investment will help you run this business. The business plan has to be, as I said, has to be done very carefully. Best to work with a professional for that. And you show that you will actually come here and run a successful business. The good thing with the E2 is that you don't need a very, big type of business. We've used the E2 for very, small businesses like laundromats and restaurants and, smaller operations, cleaning services, things like that. So it's a good option. As I said, again, there has to be an investment, at least 100,000 or so. But again, it depends on the kind of business. If you are, planning for a very, high capital intensive business, then you obviously need to invest more. And you, demonstrate that you're coming here to run that business.
That's very helpful to know that India and China are not eligible for the E2, but most other countries are. So if you are interested in trading or investing, make sure you're looking into that visa option. So we talked about a few visa alternatives from the H-1B. Are there any perks, Diya, that these alternative visas offer that the H-1B visa doesn't offer? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, again, it depends on the kind of visa, obviously. The biggest advantage is that then you are not, having to be at the mercy of the H-1B lottery and, we're filing in March for a potential start date of October in the same year, right? With many of these visa categories, you can ask for an immediate start date. And, they might also offer you the ability to work for, have a broader based employment. You could, run your own business like with the E2. You could, so I guess the main thing is you're not going through the cycle. You can ask for an immediate start date.
So it sounds like there are quite a few benefits to all of these alternatives that people should be looking into, and knowing that there are other options from the H-1B. So let's say someone starts with an alternative visa. If the H-1B cap improves, are they able to switch? Is that an option?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, actually. So I guess what you're asking is, let's say somebody comes on a different visa type, like an E2 or an L1, can they still apply in the cap? Yeah, so you can apply in the cap every year. And depending on how you want to structure it, do you want, if you are successful in the H-1B cap and you actually get selected and you wish to apply for a change of status in the US, then you could, file your H-1B petition as a change of status. Or, sometimes, clients like to have the H-1B as a backup option, like they just want it in the back pocket. Then they might consider applying for the H-1B petition seeking consular processing so that they can continue in the US in whatever visa status they have at the moment. And then, they can choose when they want to activate the H-1B, right? Because the H-1B petition has been approved as consular processing. They would not really get to H-1B status until they apply for an H-1B visa at the consulate and then re-enter the US in H-1B status. So, there's different things you can, I guess there's a little bit of planning that you can do once you get selected in the H-1B lottery.
So you talked about those individuals that want to be extra safe to make sure that they can stay in the United States. So is it possible or even advisable to apply for more than one visa simultaneously?
Yeah, as long as you are qualified for that visa time, there is, really no limitation on applying. For example, the same person could qualify for an H-1B as well as an L1 visa, right? You can apply and, you can have those visas stamped in your passport, I guess. But it's important to remember you can only have one visa status at any point of time in the US, right? So you might have a B1, B2, a visitor visa. You might have an H-1B, and you can have an L1 visa, right? 3 different types of visas theoretically in your passport. But anytime you enter the US, you have to choose one, right? So you would be allowed entry in one specific status. And so you have to decide which visa type you're going to be using for that particular entry. And sometimes you'll also have the situation where you apply for a visa at the consulate, and the consular officer might cancel a prior visa. So it's done without prejudice. They'll actually say cancel without prejudice. So sometimes that happens, although really the consulate shouldn't be doing it, but happens.
That's great info. So we've had some clients reaching out about EB1, EB2, and EB3 employment-based green cards. Are these viable alternatives to the H-1B visa?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, you could, with instead of applying for these temporary visas, these work permits, work visas, you could apply for the permanent residency or the green card directly. Now, because the applications, the petitions typically will tend to be for prospective positions, so an employer could very well sponsor a foreign national for one of these applications, employment-based residency applications, EB1, EB2, EB3, etc., even before the foreign national is in the US working for them. It makes sense as long as you understand the timelines, right? Unless you are from India or China, the timelines are not terrible, I would say. EB1 category, which is the first priority, that's current for most countries, for people from most countries except for India and China. EB2 and EB3 also are not terribly backlogged. But so if you don't mind that wait, the processing time plus the retrogression, which might be a year or so for most other countries, then it works. But if you are from India or China, then the green card applications will still take some time. So you just have to plan accordingly.
So it sounds like we have to take into consideration the different processing times for these alternative visas, as well as, depending on where they're at, the processing time might take a little longer. Maybe there's premium processing available. Is that an option for some of these visas?
Yeah, the good thing is now, in fact, in the last 1 year or so, the premium processing options have expanded significantly, right? So with most work permits now, you have the option of premium processing, H1s, L1s, all of them. But it's also sometimes it makes sense to not choose premium processing, and that's something that should be discussed with the immigration advisor, practitioner. For example, there might be child status protection issues, CSPA issues. So where you actually want to take advantage of the time that USCIS takes to adjudicate the case. So there are certain situations where premium processing might not make the most sense for you, and so it's helpful to take that into consideration. But yes, otherwise it's generally a blessing that there is premium processing now.
That's great to know that more countries are getting on that premium processing and allowing people to use that option. So we talked about all of these alternatives to the H-1B visa. Are there any potential drawbacks, things that we need to look out for when choosing these visa alternatives over the H-1B?
I think the answer to that is again going to be it depends, because most of these visas, as you can see, they come with their own nuances and peculiarities, right? With the J1, for example, the J1 visa is a good option for a lot of students, people who want to do some sort of, research in the US, training, etc. But some of these J1s come with the requirement, the home, country residence requirement, which basically means that after completing the J1 tenure in the US, the foreign national has to go back and spend 2 years in their home country, right? So that's for many applicants, that's a drawback, and they don't want to entertain that. So it's, I feel it's best to discuss these things proactively with your immigration practitioner before you get into it. With the H1 and the L1, there are, timeline requirements, right? Timeline limitations. The H1 you normally would hold for 6 years unless you get to a certain stage in your green card processing before the 6 years is up. Then the H and the L times run against each other. So there are many such nuances. And so it's always best to discuss these upfront with your practitioner before you apply for them.
Thank you, Diya. Those are some really helpful things to keep in mind. So make sure if you are considering these visa alternatives that you are talking with your immigration attorney. They can guide you through the process. Make sure you do it right the first time so that you're not stuck in this loop of having to fix things. And, it gets a little difficult when you don't start off correctly. So make sure you are talking to your professionals. We're here to help you if you need anything. Reach out to us anytime. I think that is all we have time for. So thank you so much, Diya, for spending your time with us and sharing your insights with us. This does bring us to the end of our conversation for everyone watching. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please like this video if it was helpful, and to stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Turn on the notification button so you can be notified of our next video. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to send us an email anytime at info@chuk.com, and we're happy to help you out. And join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care.